I'll point at you, Renette.
Good morning. We are back, and we're running down the races for Saturday's December 11th election. With us now are the runoff candidates for Clerk of Criminal District Court. This forum is being sponsored by the Black-Owned Media Coalition, comprised of the media, print, radio entities in New Orleans, Louisiana that are owned by black folk. They are WBOK, Data News Weekly, Think 504, New Orleans Tribune, and the Louisiana Weekly. Our guests today are Austin Badon, who is running, of course, and Mr. Lombard. Our panelists are Cece Campbell-Rock with the Louisiana Weekly, Anitra Brown with the New Orleans Tribune, and Carrie Jones, Data News Weekly. Our first question will go to Ms. Anitra Brown.
Thank you. My first question is for Mr. Battle. Thank you for being here today. A big part of the job of the Clerk of Criminal Court is handling the elections process for the Parish of Orleans. Talk to us about, or could you tell us what specific experiences or skills you believe you have that best prepare you to ensure that that process is as efficient and effective as it should be, and what would you do to make improvements where they need to be made?
So my experience dates back to my, my education. I have a political science degree from the University of New Orleans. I also have a master's degree in human resources from Troy State University, which I obtained on the West Bank, which is now at Federal City. So I have the education and the background to be able to do that. I worked for Fortune 500 companies. I've been the leader of different organizations that have I've employed other people under me, so I've been able to work in that capacity to ensure a great administrative procedure. I have worked to make sure that the policies that were implemented were fair and those policies were legal. And so, you know, when you look at the elections process in New Orleans and you look at my skills, my education, my experience, it's uniquely designed to help make sure that the election process is smooth and fair. You know, growing up in New Orleans, I remember the days when you were able to walk to the polling place. We've gotten away from that. I want to make sure that I use my legislative contacts in Baton Rouge to bring on more polling places. But, you know, we could do better. Even in the last election on November 13th, the numbers were coming in very late. The numbers from East New Orleans as well as the numbers from the West Bank. We have to utilize best practices, modern technology to make sure that elections are accessible, they're fair, they're free from any infiltration from outside entities, and people have the opportunity to go vote. I want to reach out to young people to make sure that they get on board to be able to go and vote, as well as older people who are already registered to bring them back in the fold. There has to be a concerted effort to have more people involved in the polling process.
Thank you. Mr. Lombard.
My experience goes back to 2006, immediately after Katrina, when we were tasked with bringing the city back to some state of normalcy. I was involved in the process of moving polling places from where they were at the time, which were many mega sites, because we lost most of the buildings that we had previously. So that was a monumental task that I took on, where I got the polling places we had that were at right around 75, all the way up to about 124 locations. So we've been steadily, during those years, bringing those polling places back on. So I have 6 years just of doing supervising and coordinating elections for the parish of Orleans. So that makes me uniquely qualified and the only candidate in the race who has any experience at all with coordinating an election. So I literally can walk into that office today and run it, and it would run smoothly. We've never had any issues with fraud or fair elections or anything of that matter. Fortunately, we are not cursed with the problem of having to deal with these laws that are coming down the pipe to disenfranchise voters. So that's a strong point for me in that I have all those years doing that. Now I am currently on the Board of Election Supervisors, which supervises the elections for the entire parish of Orleans. So I have all that experience, and the vice chair and the governor's appointee. So I'm basically his eyes and ears for this, for the parish. So along those lines, I've done things also that we were responsible for training 1,700 commissioners and poll workers. We've never had an issue with those and training those people. We had to have those ready election day every time we did an election without fail. So we did very well with that. We also maintained that the precincts are served properly and all the locations have the proper equipment. So we've done that over the years. There's never been an issue. And again, that makes me the only candidate qualified to handle an election in this race.
Next question will be Tara Jones from Data Newsweek.
Okay, this may be a kind of a simple question. Maybe everybody knows it from me. But the question is, every election time, there's certain parishes that come in late.
Mm-hmm.
And historically, there's been parishes that were more African American minority or majority.
Mm-hmm.
If the polls close at a certain time, why does that always happen in those parishes?
It's usually due to geographic issues where we're transporting the information that comes out of the machines to the central office, which is criminal district court. Now, in that situation, the West Bank, for instance, the West Bank in New Orleans, certain parts of New Orleans East, are all brought in at one time to one location and then brought over to criminal court, where they're then transmitted to the state. The issue becomes if there's a polling commissioner that is having trouble with their equipment or getting their information set up properly to bring in, it holds up the whole process. So I've discussed this with the clerk and members of the Secretary of State, Carl Ardwine and his staff, and Sherry Haskey, who's the Commissioner of Elections. And I've discussed this all the way back to 2006 about ways to speed up that process because it's not, it doesn't look the best, but it's something necessary. But I'm discussing ways where we could possibly transmit those results from the West Bank instead of having to wait for those commissioners to come in, drop their materials off, and then bring them across the river. So we're going to figure that out and work through that. I've already had discussions with the state over it. We're going to get that taken care of right away.
You know, Terry, when we had our victory party the other night back in November, the night just kept going on and on and on. We are a big city, but yet we are a small city. We can't keep making these excuses as to why the numbers don't come in. We have the modern technology. We have the term real time. We need to make sure, and that's something that I will commit to you, that we will do that in real time. When you start looking at early voting, you have so many people who are disenfranchised with early voting because, like my mother, for example, my mother will not do it because she feels like those numbers should be dumped into the queue at 8:01. Why are they coming in 10 o'clock, 10:30? You know, also the mail-in ballots, they're coming in late. We have to do better. So again, I've spoken with Kyle Ardwine, who's our Secretary of State, and pledged to him to work with his office to make sure we're going to fix this problem and we're going to finally get it done. Because it always goes back to undermining the people's integrity and their confidence in voting. And so, you know, just to say that the numbers from the West Bank and Orleans, East New Orleans continually come in late and we're going to accept that, I'm not going to accept that. The people don't want that. The people want to do better. They want to have something that's better. So we need to utilize modern technology, best practices to make sure that we have these numbers come in. When the polls close, those numbers should be married up to a mother computer, and we should have those numbers instead of waiting throughout the night for that process to end, because it just undermines the public confidence in the whole voting process.
Can I address his response,
You
please?
can address at the end.
Okay.
We're on a time schedule. Next question, C.C. Campbell.
The Louisiana Weekly has reported on consistently the placement of polling sites, specifically as it relates to Pontchartrain Park. It was brought to our attention by a voter activist, Carl Gallman, that after Katrina, the polling places were no longer central to the Pontchartrain Park area or to Southern University students. So there seems to be, after we looked into it, some sort of racial disparity in terms of the placement of the polling places. For example, the Southern Baptist Seminary has 5 or 6 polling places within it. UNO has polling places, at least Ben Franklin does, as I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
The senior high school has polling places, but there's none on Southern's campus. So why should the elderly people in Pontchartrain Park, as well as the Southern University students, have to travel all the way to Chef Highway when you have the golf course clubhouse could be a place, for example?
Right.
So what are you willing to do to make sure that these people in that corridor, the Pontchartrain Park corridor, have easy access to the voting polling sites?
So, I'll go first. So it goes back to what I was saying before, and I've spoken to Carl about this. There's a disproportionate number of polling sites in places that are not conducive to the African American population. And I'm very familiar with Pontchartrain Park, having, spent a lot of time with family members in that area and hearing the same thing. After Katrina, the office really got complacent. There were a number of polling sites that were put up around the city, and people had to drive to those sites instead of, as I mentioned before, being able to walk to those sites, being able to have camaraderie with your neighbors, being able to go and vote in your own neighborhood. I can pledge to you to do a complete and reevaluation of where these polling sites are, to make sure that people who are on college campuses such as Xavier, Dillard, SUNO actually have access to those polling sites. This is simple. We're talking about placing machines here where people can have the very basic right, and that is the right to vote. So I will pledge to you to do that.
I will say this. This is another point where my opponent doesn't understand the process. The process right now, as it stands by law, is that the city council is responsible for managing that aspect of it. The clerk of court's office is responsible for certifying these locations, getting that information to the Secretary of State and the Justice Department, and getting that approval before a polling place is moved. So it is a lengthy process. Although I don't like the process, I think it could be shortened, but it starts with the city council members. So in District D, that city council member will be responsible for engaging the community in where they want their polling places to be. Immediately after Katrina, we got all the polling places up that we could. Then it came back to the responsibility of the city council, not the clerk's office. Remember, it starts with the clerks, with the city council, not the clerks, by law.
I'm aware of that, and as a matter of fact, in our reporting, we touched base with the Councilman Brissett, and we got no action in terms of what he could do. So even though it is a city council responsibility, I'm asking you guys as the candidates for the clerk of criminal court, will you then step in and at least work with the council to make this a fair process?
Oh, absolutely. That's the way it's structured. So I've done it in the past. I've reached out to all of those city council members when I was still there. They came with recommendations that we then took action on. Of course, I want to push it I want polling places as close as possible to people. As a matter of fact, I brought polling places to Tulane, to UNO, in those locations like that, because I believe the students are very important, as well as the senior citizens. They should not have to travel far distances to get to their polls. Now, those polling mega sites were there because of the situation with Katrina and then the city coming back slowly. But now it should not be that way. Although we still have lost some of those locations permanently, we can work with the city council, and I look forward to doing that every opportunity I get to reach out to them to see what locations they recommend for us and to push them to engage the community and seeking locations that they want.
Let me just chime in on that. So I'm the kind of guy who I'm gonna get things done. I don't have people who work for me who tell me this is why we can't do something. I'm going to have people who work for me who's going to find a way to do it. I'm not going to give you excuses. So in my entire career, I've been able to work with people across the board to get things done. Appealing to the city council, appealing to the mayor, appealing to the governor, to the legislature, to go out and change laws and fix things so we can help people. It's about people over politics, and we need to make sure that the people are served. We have to put these polling sites where the people are, and we have to make sure that it is accessible and fair to all people in every aspect of our society.
Thank you, Mr. Badon. Anitra Brown with the Tribune. Next question.
Okay, so I guess this question is for Mr. Lombard to begin with. I can think back in 2018, I think there was a break-in in the evidence room at Orleans Parish Criminal Court. I want to know, in your attempt to become the next clerk of court, how would you work to ensure the security of those important pieces of information, data, and items that are important to the criminal court process? And have you surveyed the status of the evidence room? What do you think needs to be done? What are the holes that you would like to patch up? Or just how would you work to make sure that that area is as secure as possible because of its importance to the criminal justice system?
Well, since then, I believe the current clerk has moved property and evidence into an elevated area that was opened up and renovated with the old, I think it's the old central lockup area. So it's much more secure now. What we're going to do is seek the funding for electronic monitoring. We want to have cameras watching every inch of that room in those areas. We want to have that. We also want to make sure that we have bar scan coding to make sure that everything, when it's touched, it's monitored and tracked from that point till the time that it returns back there from the judges. So there's also issues where there's still currently property that is in the lower part of the I want to say the basement area, which has had some issues. So has been reported. That evidence and property are two different things. Evidence is is still adjudicated. It's still in the process of going to court and going through all of that. Property, however, is stuff that has been released to the owners who may have abandoned it or not. It's stuff like guns, cash, things of that nature. So that can be moved up so it won't be exposed to potential flooding or anything like that. So we're going to work on that as well. But, you know, as far as I know of, from what I've seen with my own eyes, that the evidence has been moved up to a safer level and is being monitored better. And we're going to do what we can to upgrade that process and make sure that we don't have any missing evidence or damaged evidence or anything like that.
I'm going to make sure that nothing is in the ground level, because we saw that during Katrina where the floodwaters came in and damaged everything and compromised cases. There's something called a prescriptive period. So this is something that could be resurrected. So if you think that, well, we could put it in the ground level and, eventually we could just get rid of it, under the prescriptive period, something may come about where we need that evidence or we need that property. So we have to secure it. But as I've done as the clerk of First City Court, I've actually reached out to the state and I found out as to how long we have to maintain certain pieces of evidence or different pieces of displays, so we don't have to keep that stuff for an extended period of time and then also have to pay for it where the public pays for it. When I was a corrections officer, I learned a term called chain of custody. That means that when evidence or items come in, we have to make sure that it is very secure. I've spoken to a number of judges who don't have a high level of security in the value of the evidence. I'm going to make sure that we have photographic evidence, cameras under my office's control, not anybody else's control, barcodes, scanners. We're going to weigh the evidence when it goes out, photograph it, and it's got to be the same as to when it comes back in, so there's no problem there. But we are going to ensure that this evidence is maintained in a very safe manner because people's lives depend on it. People's futures, their careers, their livelihood depends on it. So this is something that is very pertinent to the criminal justice system, that evidence is maintained in a very secure manner. We have to make sure that the judges have what they need and there's no compromise for the evidence when it goes to trial.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take a quick break. We're listening to the candidates running for Clerk of Criminal District Court, sponsored by the Black-Owned Media Coalition. We're continuing. We're continuing our forum with the candidates for Clerk of Criminal Court. Next question will be posed by Mr. Jones with Data News Weekly.
Yes, Mr. Badon, I have a question that everybody knows that everybody knows that the job that you guys do is about the election and the election process, but I don't know the entitlement of the job. Could you kind of explain what else the responsibility is for that office other than the election?
Sure, yes. Number one, and one of the top parts of my platform, is to assist people and educate people on expungements. That's critical in our community. I am going to personally work with the community and bring them in for people who need expungements to help them and assist them with expungements. There are a number of judges there, and so as clerk of First City Court, we have 4 judges. There, I believe it's 12 judges. And so those judges have to have files, and all of the pleadings that come in from attorneys must go into those files. I want to work with those judges to make sure that they have everything that they need to be able to hear those cases in a very fair and expeditious manner. They need to have all of the documentation right in front of them, and so that's what the clerk does, maintains the records. The clerk is the custodian of the records. The clerk is the custodian of the evidence and property for all of the cases that you hear. Another thing is with the elections, the chief part of it is being chief elections officer in the city of New Orleans, making sure that commissioners are trained, polling places are staffed, you have enough polling places, and then people have access to voting. So those are some of the things that this office does. But reaching out to young people and trying to bring them into the voting process is part of my one of the top parts of my platform. Other people who are already registered to vote, but there's a lot of people who are already registered to vote, but yet they have a low voting percentage. I want to make sure that those people are re-engaged into the process. But there's about 85 to 90 jobs. I lead by example. I have a mild temperament. The buck stops with me. I have a great management style. And those individuals over there, and it's been said I'm going to walk in there and fire everybody. I'm here on record to say that is not the case. I never even thought that. But those individuals over there do a great job, and they also need a strong leader. If you look at my leadership skills, it is definite to, above any other candidate in this race that I have the temperament, I have the leadership skills, I have the education to provide great customer service and outreach to our community through that office.
Okay, I'm a little confused. Are you saying that within your perimeter, within your budget, you can recruit people to register to vote, or recruit or some campaign to make them come to vote? Is that inside your purview of?
I have strong media contacts, and being able to go to the media and discuss and educate people on the importance of voting. I came up learning through people like Jim Singleton as well as Dorothy Mae Taylor, the importance, the spiritual, the social, the civic responsibility of voting. And so I strongly believe in people's access to vote. So being able to go out and use media contacts, educate people, go to senior citizen centers, go to schools and try to recruit and sign young people up into voting. That's the top part of my platform. I think it's critically important to the voting process.
Mr. Lombard.
Well, to address that part first, the current clerk, as well as myself, we've already gone to schools and events, community events to get people to register to vote. We're always discussing with people. As a matter of fact, I was on the radio yesterday morning discussing with young people the importance of engaging and getting involved in the election process. If you want to see things change, you have to do that. So we discussed that. So that's a constant thing that's always going on with the clerk's office. It's nothing new. It's always been an issue. Part of the other issues with the clerk's office and what they do is, of course, move the paperwork around. But one thing I want to do that hasn't been done, I want to make sure that the new CMS system that we bring in has the ability for the inmates to view their cases. So when they're there, they can take care of that themselves instead of having to wait between lawyer visits and things of that nature. We also want to get the DA's office involved in that process, and the sheriff's office and the judges. All of them want to participate in the process to make this all work better. Now, as far as expungements are concerned, I'm the only candidate who is going to reduce or eliminate the expungement fees. I believe that's a roadblock to young black men, particularly, to getting back into society and becoming productive members. We can't have a system that claims to rehabilitate you, but yet put roadblocks in the way all along the way you're trying to get back into society. So I want to eliminate that altogether. I want to work with all the other agencies. I've already talked with Jason Williams about it, who, by the way, is going to be endorsing me soon. So we've talked about it. I'm going to be reaching out to the judges as well. They've been trying to do things. I'm going to reach out to the state police about reducing their fees. In other states, those expungement fees are completely free, or a minimal cost of $20 or $30. So I think that we should get caught up with the times and eliminate that and help people get their lives back together. Now, the other part of it is that with the elections process, I want to lobby the state to expand early voting days and times. In some states, like, for instance, Georgia, I believe they had it, and they're trying to eliminate it now. I want early voting to go from Sunday to Sunday, not just Saturday to Saturday. I want people to be able to leave church, go vote, and then go home. So that will make the election process more accessible to the community.
Next question, Cece Campbell.
So I have two questions, and I'm going to start with Mr. Beto. As I understood it, after Katrina, a lot of records were destroyed, and judges are now having problems. Also, the non-unanimous jury law that was struck down, now the DA is hearing at least, 5,000 cases, and some of those cases, they don't have records because the flooding took out the records. So, and I'm going to also ask Mr. Lombard too. As it stands now, are the records, as Anita said, secure? What kind of computerized system is there? Do you feel that they're secure, the records? And what are you going to do about whomever gets elected about the missing records in terms of prosecutions and facilitating that?
That's a real problem, because if the record is gone, and then Katrina's now going on 16 years, a lot of the witnesses they're gone as well. I don't know what's going to happen with the disposition of some of those cases. The judges are going to be in a very difficult position to address those cases, if or when they are brought back up, because now you don't have the evidence, you may not have the witnesses there. And so, do I feel secure do I feel comfortable that the evidence is secure? I think we could always do better. Part of my platform is to reach out to organizations and establish a public-private partnership where those individuals and those agencies who have a skin in the game with social justice reform are going to help me to make sure that we reach out to people and that we provide, evidence, and we provide accessibility to people who feel like they've been wrongly incarcerated and they want new access to their files. I'm going to reach out to the Department of Justice. There's a special office called the Office of Justice Programs where they give out grants. And so, to have a grant writer under contract on my staff to be able to secure grants and funding to make this office more accessible and secure. There's a lot of organizations that want to provide funding. There's federal organizations that want to provide funding. Expungements, as was stated before, I don't think you could give expungements a free ride and just make it free for everybody. I can tell you, I know a guy who lives in Lakeview. He's a multi-millionaire. Why would we just give him a free expungement? He could definitely afford to pay $550. However, there is a process. We commonly refer to it as IFP, informal paupers. People could apply for that. And if the judge, leave it up to the judge, let the judge decide if people could pay for it or not pay for it. If they can't pay for it, then we could assist them with grant money. If they could pay for it, then that's fine. But you cannot just arbitrarily give away public dollars. I mean, it's not our money to give away.
Let me ask Mr. Lombard, the computerized system, at one point, as I understood it, and this might have been pre-Katrina, most of the documents were on hard copy, the computerized system was, I don't even know what to call it, was not adequate. Is it adequate now? And if not, what would you do?
I don't believe, because of budgetary issues, Mr. Morrell has been kind of had his hands tied behind his back with that issue. But I'm going to work forward, looking forward on dealing with that. I don't believe it's sufficient to get the job done correctly and efficiently right now. I've been talking to my congressman about infrastructure money, that there's some money involved in there that we can access as well. We already have grant writers in motion. I've already, just to give you an example, I've already procured $75,000 for a new CMS system for a Second City Court. I'm the only clerk who's done that for any city court yet, so in Orleans Parish. So we're going to work on that. I'm going to work with Jason Williams as well. We're dealing with this issue of not having the files that have been destroyed. Just to give you a quick example, in 2013, when I took office, my office was just on paper. That was the only mode of recording anything, was through paper only. From the same process from 1920 to the day I walked into office was still there. So I worked with the IT department over at Civil District Court, and we immediately started working on, within 30 to 60 days, we started working on a new system. That was a baseline system. So for what is at CDC right now. So now we digitize every document from 2013 till this day. We digitize everything we touch, whether it's an old file, a new file, something coming through the door, something that's been in play for a while. We make sure that we have a record, because my number one concern was, if the building is destroyed, those records are destroyed, whether it be by fire, tornado, storm, or whatever. So I addressed that immediately. That was the first thing I addressed when I walked through the door at Second City Court, and that made the whole system run way more efficiently. Unlike my opponent, I've actually worked on a system where we customized it and made sure it works properly today. Now, the next phase of it, we're going to have it where people can file online, so they don't have to even come down there. So we want to eventually end up in a paperless state where we have it backed up in several other locations. So if by chance, if we lose everything, we got much worse problems than the court system. That means we've had some kind of nuclear event or something of that nature. So I plan on doing that with criminal court, so we don't have to deal with files being lost in the future. I'm going to work with Jason with regard to all of those cases that they have missing files on.
Well, the question I had in mind was actually a follow-up to what you spoke about before the previous question, when you mentioned making expungements free. I wanted to ask you how would you make up for those dollars?
Well, throughout my journey, throughout this campaign, I did my research, and I found out that the funds that are generated, the public dollars that are generated, only comes up to about $60,000. So I think that's going to be pretty easy to match or work with state legislators, or whether it be through state legislators or getting monies through the infrastructure program that's coming from the federal side of things. So I believe that will free people up who normally wouldn't bother because of their fear of the system and the cost of the system or the process, to come in and get their expungements done. I believe it should be free. I don't think it should cost you. You're the poorest person in the system, right? If you're coming out of jail, you probably don't. It's a good guess that you don't have a job. So if you have a roadblock there that's going to cost you at a minimum $550 and could cost you potentially in the thousands. That's going to limit what you're able to do, how you're able to take care of your family, how you're able to be productive. These people go back to the streets and do what they did in the first place. So, I don't want to see the vicious cycle over and over again. And my opponent says it shouldn't be free. I believe it should be. That will help eliminate and drop the rate of crime. If I'm a guy who's coming off the street and I don't have a job, I'm desperate. So I am going to do things that I would not want to do to survive. That's just human nature. So what we want to do is be humane about it and make sure these people have this process done for free if they want it. Now, some people, we know some bad guys that need to sit down, they'll never do right. So those persons probably won't even engage the process. So I feel like if you're trying to engage the process, that means you're trying to do right, you're trying to get your life back together, you're trying to be a productive member of society. And that's how you help the overall society become a more positive situation.
So can I chime in on that one?
Yes.
Okay, so just briefly, what you're asking and what my opponent is proposing is called an unfunded mandate, which is unconstitutional in Louisiana. You can't just arbitrarily give away the public money. And when you start talking about, well, we're going to make this free or we're going to make that free or we're going to reduce cost on that, there's a process that you have to go through to be able to do that. So when you take money away from one thing, you have to get it from somewhere else to offset those costs. I don't have a problem with certain people having it to where it is free or it's accessible. I believe that everybody deserves justice, whether you live under the Pontchartrain Expressway or whether you live, in Eastover or St. Charles Avenue. Everybody deserves justice. However, it's a certain way of going about doing it. That's why I brought up the informal pauper process. That's something that we currently use, where people who, they deserve justice, they come into the court system, but they don't have the funds, they could apply for this special designation, and a judge would make that decision as to whether they do that. Because you just don't want to give it away. There's a lot of people, like I mentioned, a friend of mine has got a multi-million-dollar seafood company, a beautiful family, beautiful home. There's no way he should be given that free, $550 to be, to get an expungement. He had a simple drug arrest maybe about 51 years ago, and that's on his record. There's a lot of people out there who have this charge on their record. We need to help them to get it off. But just to arbitrarily give it away free, that's not the right thing to do.
Thank you, Mr. Badon. We're moving on to closing statements. We will begin with Mr. Lombard.
Well, I'd like to start back where we just came off of. It is not an arbitrary act. The clerk's office has your number one responsibility legally is to follow the law. Now, just a minute ago, my opponent said that he's going to do X, Y, Z because he gets things done. Okay, that's fine. But you implied that you can get it done. I am going to work with our friends in the legislature and in the federal government to supplement that $60,000 so it can be free for everybody. Anybody who wants it should have it, in my opinion. So if you have an issue with charging people, that's fine, that's your opinion. But I don't think that should be that's a burden to society. It's a public safety issue in most cases. Because if I'm a guy who's prone to rob to feed my family, at some point something's going to happen. Somebody's going to get hurt or killed. So I believe it should be free for everybody. I want to address a couple other issues. My opponent said that the office has become complacent. We've not had one issue or complaint with our voter process. We've not had anything go to federal court or to the local courts. So that tells you that the office is not complacent. Those people worked very hard. Let me backtrack and correct that. We worked very hard to make sure the process is filled with integrity, honesty, and transparency. That's why we don't have any issues. Now, the problem, there's only one issue with the election process right now, and we can all improve everything we're doing with that process. But my opponent wants to paint the picture as if there's some fraud going on, like in these jurisdictions like Alabama, where Trump is making up all these stories so he can change the voter laws. We don't want to do that, because we have a good process right now. We're going to improve it. So I want to say this. I'm the only candidate in this race that has ever put on an election, and I've done it since 2006. So that makes me uniquely qualified to be the one who can carry that mantle forward with transparency, clarity, and accuracy. Now, as far as the course, I'm going to go back to it again. I believe that expungement should be for free. It's a public safety issue. I'm number 10 on the ballot. My name is Darren Lombard, the only experienced candidate in this race for the Clerk of Criminal District Court's office.
Thank you, Mr. Lombard. Mr. Bell.
Well, first off, I'd like to thank Black-owned Media for having me here today. It's been a great experience, and I'm always happy to support the Black-owned media. I'd also like to thank the 43.5% of the people who voted for me in the primary election back in November. I'd like to thank them. And I'd also like to thank Dr. Patricia Boyd Robertson, as well as Councilman Jared Brosette, who has now come on board to my campaign and supported my campaign. I'm Austin Badon, number 8 on the ballot. I'm offering myself to be your Clerk of Criminal District Court. I am happily married for 26 years to my wife, Therese, who is the Vice President for the United Negro College Fund. Many of you have met my son here today. He's 10-year-old. He's a 10-year-old little boy who is being educated in the public schools in New Orleans. We worship at St. Peter Claver as well as Maria Goretti Church and also at Franklin Avenue Baptist Church. Being elected is more than just showing up for office. It's about public service, and that's why I'm so proud of my humanitarian work. It's been said that I'm not for women, but a few years ago, Renette went missing. I helped her to be rejoined to her family. A few years ago, Miss Jean Stokes went missing. I helped her to be rejoined to her family. About a year ago, a young lady from Baton Rouge went missing. I helped her to be rejoined to her family. So to say something like that is totally ludicrous. I'm Austin Badon. You know me. I didn't just show up. I've been doing the work in our community. You know how much of a public servant I have been. I don't just show up at election time. I've been doing the work all year long. And I ask you for your continued support, your prayers on December 11th, this Saturday, to support me in my campaign, because it's about people over politics. And I thank you for all that you have done for me in the past, and I look forward to being able to serve you in the future. Thank you.
Well, there you have it. The two candidates running for Clerk of Criminal District Court. The election is Saturday, December 11th. They're the second on the ballot. Please go out and vote. Thank you, gentlemen, and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.